everyone, and welcome to this edition of Shergroup on the Sofa. I hope wherever you
which is where we started. The original, the founder and his wife did licensing from their kitchen table 26 years ago. They saw a need for it, and we kind of took it from there. There's a lot of pieces. Licensing is not easy. The states have different needs. And so Cornerstone has filed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of applications and is able to walk people through the process, answer those hard questions, and just be there to help get the application submitted correctly. The states want what they want, and you don't want to go back and forth with deficiencies. So Cornerstone really is here to facilitate that process of licensing and take that burden away from the agencies, so they can do what they do best, and collect on debt.
Yeah, of course, and not have the compliance issues that licensing obviously puts. I'm going to say a burden, but it's a regulatory requirement, so it's non-negotiable. I mean, it is what it is, right? So I think it's interesting that you cover all 50 states. So I guess you cover all 50 states. I mean, am I right on that? I mean, how many states do require debt collection licenses for third-party consumer debt collection?
Yeah, I want to throw this in real quick, if you don't mind, the legal disclaimer. Not an attorney, just providing advice here on what we see every day. Always recommend that you seek legal guidance, and happy to answer your questions today with that in mind. So let's talk about third-party collections. There's a difference between consumer and commercial. There are 35 states and 4 cities that require consumer licensing requirements. So let's say you're collecting a debt in Arkansas. Before you do that, you're going to need to obtain a license. All the licenses are a little different. Some are more complex than others. You're going to, you look at your business model, you make sure you know where you're going to be collecting. And that's kind of one thing too that's hard these days, is you have to be licensed where the debtor is located. So let's say I'm in Georgia, and there's not a licensing requirement here. So somebody could call and collect debt from me today. But if I up and move to, let's say, Tennessee, then there's a licensing requirement in Tennessee. So you have to know where your debtor is located. And that's kind of where, the 35 states and 4 cities are ones that you need to look at when it comes to consumer collections.
Does
Commercial,
that
it's a
mean
little,
that does that mean just thinking that through? Do
yeah.
you see agencies that just say, do you know what, it's just going to be simpler to license in all 50 states so that I haven't, I've got a catch-all for debtors moving around the country?
Yeah, I mean, that's the safest approach. Obviously, starting out, agencies may do regionally, and as they grow in their business, they'll add additional states. Um, we do see a lot of times where if you're trying to get a client, the agency's trying to get a client, they want to see that you're licensed everywhere in
Yeah,
order to place that with you. So when those RFPs come in, obviously it looks good if you have everything and you don't have to kind of pull out certain states because that can get tricky. So,
yeah,
ultimately licensing in all these states and cities is what's going to get your business to where you want it to be.
of course. And commercial, third-party commercial debt collection, that's from the slide, it looks like it's slightly less onerous.
It is. And so that's, commercial, it's B2B. You're collecting from a
Yeah,
business.
yeah,
So, a lot of the laws and regulations are fitted for consumer. So there
yeah,
are less licensing requirements in the commercial space. Obviously, still a good number there, 22 states and 2 cities. So still a lot of licensing to consider, but it is less than if you're doing consumer collections. A lot of times we'll see people, maybe they start out commercial and then they have the opportunity to pick up some consumer collections. So you always need to keep in mind, if you do that, you need to go look at those other states that you didn't get when you were looking at your commercial licensing landscape.
yes, of course, of course. I think from sitting outside the states, people may see the United States as one country, which of course it is, but they may not, until they get under the skin of how business is done here, appreciate that each state has its own domestic legislation and own regulations, which is not uniform. And so that
Correct.
becomes, that's where Cornerstone really step in and help, isn't it? To kind of smooth out that process of trying to get these licenses, which I know from my own business is, yeah, it's a nice challenge,
Yeah, it
especially
takes
if
some
you don't know
time.
your way. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it takes time.
it
Yeah,
does.
and absolutely, it's just it's a process.
Yeah,
And so we try to make it as painless as possible. Knowing that there's stuff that the agency's going to have to do for us and get together, but we really can make the pain of licensing a little bit easier.
yeah. So, what is an example of a state that exempts third party collections?
So there's a good bit of states that have some type of, let's think about this to see if we really need this license. Again, you may decide to get a license, even if there's an exemption. You may say, for advertising purposes, marketing, I want to be able to tell my clients I'm everywhere. So they'll get those licenses. But if you are kind of looking, maybe you're starting out and you're looking to see where you can operate first, there's a handful of states that are open border. Georgia, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have any licensing requirements here in Georgia for debt collection.
Right.
There's a certificate of authority that's obtainable, but it's not required. And that means a certificate of authority is with the Secretary of State. It gives you authority to do business in a state. And so you've got a good handful there, 8 or 10 there of states that don't have any licensing requirements. You don't even have to have a certificate of authority if you don't want to get one.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
we could take
There's
it
a few
another,
there that there's a few there that are surprising, like New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. I mean, this is on the East Coast, Virginia.
yeah,
Pretty close to Washington. So that's pretty
yeah,
surprising. They don't require licensing. Hmm.
yeah. And we see legislation that's kind of floating around. I think at some point, some of these states may go, wait a minute, we need to do something here to protect consumers. Pennsylvania, like I said, New Hampshire, maybe those would be one of them.
Yeah.
Um, but as of right now, those are still open border states for the agencies in the third party debt space.
Mm. Yeah. And what does open border mean? It means that as long as the debtor is in that state, they can collect without a license, right?
That's correct. Yes, if the debtor is located in Georgia, for example, we'll pick on where I'm at. That means someone could call into me today and collect a debt that I owe without any type of licensing.
Right.
And I think I flipped those answers there for you. You'd mentioned out of state first there. I apologize for that. That second set, there's additional states where you may not need a license because if you're communicating with debtors via interstate communication, meaning you're sitting in Georgia and you're going to call into Alaska or Michigan or Wisconsin, if you're only calling and emailing and communicating via interstate communications, there is an exemption in the statutes that you can operate under. Now, here's a weird thing. The states don't approve it. So
Right.
you're not going to get a letter from Alaska saying, yep, you can collect without a license. They're just going to tell you to refer to the statute.
Right.
Two of those states that, even though they have exemptions, Delaware and Hawaii, you still have to apply for that exemption. So
Right.
those states will give you something back. You'll get a Hawaii exemption certificate. The other
Right.
states, not so much. They're just going to tell you to refer to the statute. So a lot of people will consider these out-of-state exemptions to have a handful of additional states that they can throw in with their open border to do their collection activity.
That is a complex model. And I see the disclaimer at the bottom and seek legal advice from attorneys. So obviously there are attorneys that work alongside Cornerstone that basically, or are known to Cornerstone. I don't know if they work alongside you, but who can guide people that want to set up a shop to navigate this minefield of who's in and who's out, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We have great partnerships with a lot of attorneys who've been in the industry for a very long time. We've got one gentleman that does a lot of consulting work with us and has for quite a few years, about 10 actually. And so a lot of times when we have an agency with questions, we'll say, hey, let's get this person on the phone. Let's walk through your business model. Let's understand what you're doing. And then you can obtain a legal opinion from him. And then bring that back to me and we can get your licensing from there.
Yeah.
One thing too is to kind of always remember, like we said here, it's changing. If you get a legal opinion today, it's not a one and done. You always have to kind of have licensing in the back of your mind as states are going to change or another state's going to come on board and now have a licensing requirement. And so we help monitor those as well and share that with the industry.
Right.
But things change quite often.
Yes. Well, licensing is a minefield. It doesn't, I mean, I don't think it matters what country you're in. If you've got a licensed business, you're going to have to keep that license under review and fulfill whatever new requirements come up. So that's not unique to the US, as you know. It'd be the same in any country really that licenses its debt collection, its agencies, which is all around the protection of the consumer. Largely and making sure things are done fairly. I guess your advice would be, just looking at your slide deck here, you've got, do you need a debt collection license if you are an attorney yourself?
In some states, yes. That's kind of a minefield outside of the minefield. Some of the statutes, are very gray. And so, we could argue it one way, you could argue it one way. And a lot of times it comes down to how you interpret the statute. So obviously the decision's always on the agency, attorney, if we're talking about this. There are some states where it's very clear. Colorado has in their statute, if you are a licensed attorney in any state in the US, you don't need a Colorado debt collection license.
Right.
Others will say, if you're licensed under our state bar, like Connecticut, for example, then you don't need a license. Outside of these handful of states here for attorneys, that's where it really comes down to attorney interpretation of how the statute reads, how they interpret it, and how they're going to run their business.
And you don't want to talk about that, I'm sure. That's another, as you say, a minefield outside of the minefield.
It is.
But clearly there is a huge risk to doing business without the correct license, particularly in the United States. I mean, that's where your business adds so much value to any debt collection agency, just knowing their way around the licensing and keeping them up to date. That's a huge benefit. So we're so glad that you're coming to Congress as well. And you're not going to be able to explain all the intricacies of this, I know, but it's more about you meeting people that want to set up shop, either from outside the United States or here within the US, and getting to know you and your company and what you can actually do for them. I think it's hugely impressive.
Thank you.
So if somebody is planning to get into the debt buying space, and they plan to purchase the debt, so they own it themselves, or their agency owns it themselves. Yeah, you've got another raft of rules and regulations coming out. I thought it might be a little easier than that if they own the debt. So obviously they do need licenses in certain places. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's kind of, I consider debt buying is a separate level of licensing that you need to look at. So under the debt collection statutes, there's some states who address the acquisition of debt, the purchasing of debt. Other state statutes don't have anything in there. So we've got a handful there. There's kind of two types of debt buyers. Passive kind of seems to be going away more, and it's just with all the different rules and court rulings that even out there. Passive is where you would buy the debt, and then you would outsource the collections to a licensed collection agency. So basically, you're buying the debt, you're holding it, you're not collecting it, you're not doing the credit reporting, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a handful of debt collection states there, or debt collection licenses, that you would need to look at. An active debt buyer is someone who buys the debt and then collects on it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So more states require licensing for that because you're touching it, you're communicating with consumers. The second level of licensing when it comes to debt buying is sometimes the asset class that you're buying can trigger the need for a specialty license. Consumer installment contracts often trigger additional licensing. Sales finance contracts, those often trigger additional licensing. Pennsylvania, defaulted auto debt, that triggers some licensing. So a lot of nuances there, even more than just the standard debt collection. Something as simple as an interest rate, or the number of the loans, or there's just so many intricacies with that. You really have to get an attorney involved to know what licenses you need there, and then that way they can put together that assessment again based on the type of debt you're buying. Obviously, portfolios are different, so you may get an assessment and say, I'm only going to buy these 5 things, so here's my roadmap. Let's say someone presents you have an opportunity to buy something with a different type of asset class in it. You want to look at your licensing again there, because it's probably going to trigger some more licensing that you need to consider.
Yeah, I mean, the question that comes to mind is while you're figuring out, or things are changing because you bought a portfolio of debt that didn't fit your current license, when you want to get a new license for it. How agile does that make you in the market? I mean, is it going to slow you up, in terms of waiting for licenses to come through? What's your experience of the time scale of licensing? Is it slow, or is it nimble? What is it?
Yeah, it's, it kind of just varies by state. Some are pretty quick. Some are, the certificates of authority, or the first piece of licensing, those can be approved sometimes immediately because you file them online. Others can take 30 days or so. But when it comes to licensing, most of it's going to take between 3 to 6 months. So there is a processing time. And that's once they go to the state. So some of the longer processing times may be factors based on some of the states are going to require fingerprinting. So obviously that's going to take a little bit longer to process through, to get those fingerprints cleared. Credit checks, those things take a little bit of time. So you will see, 3 to 6 months is kind of a sweet spot for most of the debt collection licenses. Obviously there's a few that are going to take a little bit longer. Massachusetts and Nevada. Nevada does because there's a manager testing requirement. So there's 2 states with that, Michigan and Nevada. So that extends the time, because before the agency can license, an individual person must license as a manager. So that adds time to the process as well.
Yeah, that's got to be baked into your setup timing, or your changing lane in terms of, I don't know, moving from commercial to consumer, or even, as you said, changing debt type. That those processing times have got to be baked in to what you're promising a client, right? In terms of to get going. Okay.
Yep.
So then, what is it? What's involved in obtaining a license? I mean, you've got a slide for that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So it varies. Every state's a little different. Some are pretty straightforward, just kind of want the company information, officer, your ownership structure. Others are more in depth. They get into, they want to see financial statements, the fingerprinting, the background checks, the business plans. There's two systems. Um, well, there's more than two systems. A lot of the licenses now are called on a system called the NMLS. It's a mortgage database that over the
Yeah.
last 12 to 15 years, the debt collection states have kind of jumped on, as well as the other like lending type licenses have jumped on because it's a centralized place where information can be stored. Um, so you'll go in, figure out what each state requirement is, and then you enter the information. You may have some of it already in there if you already have a license on the NMLS, so that's good. Obviously, the static information of the company is going to be on all of these applications. And so if you've got a license in the NMLS, obviously you're just adding the state specific stuff to the other ones when you
Mhm.
apply. Um, some of the states still have individual portals on their websites that you have to apply. Florida has a real system where it's an online platform, but it's separate from the NMLS. And then there's still a handful of states that have paper applications. Not as many as there used to be. Obviously, the world we live in is kind of going away from paper. But there are still some states where there's an application that has to be prepared, submitted. Um, they want wet signatures. They want
Yeah.
hand rolled fingerprint cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just a gauntlet of different regulations, by state as to what's required. And that's something we really, we've done this so many times. Our specialists have been doing this on average for 5 to 7 years. So they know the checklist. They know what the states want. Sometimes the states want things that aren't on the checklist. We know that because we've done it. And then, it's having the just weird stuff on some of the states sometimes are things that we know because we've experienced it of, don't staple the application, paperclip it. Like, stuff like that even makes a difference when you're submitting applications.
Whoa, that's
Yeah.
okay. Well, I know I do a different discipline in the States in terms of licensing, but yeah, getting fingerprints, yeah,
Yeah.
that takes some navigating because you've got to be really in the States to do that. And I go to the local UPS store and get mine done. But I'm sure
Yeah.
you have, yeah, you have better systems. But yeah, there's a lot of little sub processes
Yes.
around curating all of your licensing material alongside, this sort of screen that you're showing us here of the headline. Each one of these has a little sub process that you've got to come up
Do.
with. So yeah, it's a detailed process, that's for sure. So yeah. And then I think you mentioned earlier in terms of time scale, 3 to 6 months to get licensed on
Yes.
average.
On
Yeah,
average, yes. That's a very good estimate of how long it's going to take for these debt collection licenses, about the 3 to 6 months.
yeah. And we can make this presentation part of our show notes for our YouTube channel. Is that okay? So we can use this
Yeah,
presentation? Yeah, because
that would be great. Absolutely.
it's got a lot of detail in there that somebody might want to use as a takeaway, and
Yeah.
it would just give them a headline. Um, and I think we also touched on the point that even if you get your license, you're going to have to go through and be ready for the renewal process. Now, does it kind of like timetable that? And does it work with a customer or client to basically give them a seamless renewal process as well?
Yes, that's a great question. And yes, we do. So we will attain initial licensing, and then we'll have a renewal program in place where once those licenses get approved and the registrations get approved, we're going to calendar the renewal date. Um, some of them may be like if you apply for a license now that's on the NMLS and it gets approved before it gets like November-ish, then you're going to have to renew it in December. So we know that we're going to have it calendared. We're going to, let you know when it's coming due, help you with that process. Um, we are going to, some of them are a full year, like some of the licenses, I think it's Colorado is going to renew every year in June. So that's not December, and you could get it in January and still have to renew it in June. So most of them are a year, but there are a handful that, it just depends on when it's approved, whether or not you renew it that same year. It's easier to renew a license than it is to obtain a license.
Yeah.
At that point, the state's vetted you. They know who you are. They've got your business plan. They know they've had not had any issues with your licensing, during the time that you've had it. And so it's easier to renew than it is to get it initially. Processing, state fees go down a little bit as well at renewal time, but there is a process that you have to keep up with every year.
So how many agencies do you look after? Do you know the number roughly?
Yeah, so we've licensed thousands over the years. I would say we've probably got, I don't know, 1,500 different companies at different phases in licensing and insurance and bonds, maybe even more than that. So
Yeah.
we have a lot of wonderful clients that we're very proud to work with.
Yeah. And I bet you are, I can only imagine that your service is within the credit industry in the United States is such a go-to company in terms of, let's just go to Cornerstone and get that fixed, because otherwise it could take take a chunk of time out of somebody's week, month, year to pull this all together. And they can basically outsource it to you and give you the headache, and then you curate all the material. Yeah, it's a great service. Yeah, very good.
I love getting calls from people who say, my friend referred me to you. They've used you for 20 years, or I've heard your name at shows. The industry, it's big, but it's small too. And so, the reputation that we've worked really hard for, it warms my heart that we have that. And people remember us when they move on to other jobs, or, when they have friends that are getting into the business, they send them our way. So we really, really love that.
And I can imagine that in doing what you do, you're at the center of an ecosystem where you've got attorneys, you've got insurance companies, you've got, the backup people that know how to deal with the insurance, the bonds, the legals, which is all kind of connected to the license. So it protects the license. I mean,
yes,
that's really important as well, isn't it? Because
it's very, very important.
Yeah.
Very important. We actually have an internal insurance and surety company, so we can actually write those bonds and those insurance policies in-house. We like to be that one-stop shop. But then we've got the attorney partnerships. So it's a great place to come and get your licensing taken care of.
Okay. All right. So you're going to be at the Congress, and you're going to be talking on one of the panels, discussion panels about licensing, and probably getting into a bit more. Harry Strouser is our master of ceremonies for the event, and I'm sure he knows your product.
He's a great guy.
Through OCA, yes. So we'll hear more from you then. And for anyone that is looking at this YouTube show, maybe can't get to Orlando in October, I'm going to put all of Christy's company information in the show notes, so that her website is super easy. It's cornerstonelicensing.com. And she's also got a LinkedIn page for her personally. So I'm sure if you reach out to her, she is the go-to person for this topic. Her and her colleagues, she's made it look very streamlined today. And I'm sure if you decide to set up a shop or expand your shop in the States, this is a good person and a good company to know. So thank you so much, Christy, for your support of the Congress. I've known you a long time, and really good to be able to meet up with you again in October. I look forward to seeing you. Okay?
Yeah, Claire, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I look forward to expanding on this. I know you're going to have people from all over the world, so I'll talk a little bit more about licensing in the U.S. when you're outside of the U.S. So very excited to be at the conference, and definitely looking forward to it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And for everyone else who's tuning in today to Shergroup on the sofa, you can visit our website at shergroup.com, but you can also visit the World Credit Congress at worldcreditcongress.com and find out what is going on at Congress, what is the program, both during the sessions of really interesting content like this one, which is not just dedicated to the US, but is actually giving a global take on the global credit industry. We're trying to build a global credit community through initiatives like the Congress, where we're sharing best practice, sharing ideas, and really understanding how countries differ from one another in their approach to things like licensing. Because what happens in the United States may not be the same in Canada or Mexico. There are similarities, and we can it all kind of resonates with what Christy's saying today, but really kind of building that global map of how does the credit function work around the world, so that we can kind of learn from each other. So I think that's very exciting in terms of what the Congress is actually building. And this is the 8th Congress. There have been 7 before this, and this one is great. So there's all Christy's contact information. You can follow the Congress on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So it's got a big social media presence. Please join our community. Please register for the event. Please get involved. We'd love to see you in Orlando in October. Christy, thank you again so much for today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Okay.
Thank you, Claire. You as well.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.